And Sebastian's like, no. And then so Sully?
Sully.
Mr.
Asshole.
Scully, whatever the heck his name is.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Romancing the Monsters. I'm Em.
I'm Seth.
And today I'm gonna start the episode by doing something that I don't think I've ever had to do.
Don't cancel us?
No, I'm gonna put a disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. I'm gonna ask for our listeners' cooperation and tolerance. If, today's book touches upon a very sensitive subject matter. For the sake of being as clear as possible, we want to warn you that the hero here does rape the heroine and then still becomes the romantic hero later on in the story. So if that sounds like something that is upsetting to you or would make you angry and you do not have any sort of tolerance for that and you do not want to listen to a conversation about it, Seth and I are going to try and have like a nuanced conversation about it because we still think it's an interesting book to discuss. Yeah. But if that's like a hard limit for you, then we're going to ask you to take a step back and not listen to this episode. Please and thank you. Today's book is called To Have and to Hold by Patricia Gaffney. If I remember correctly, this is a 1994 release.
All right, it released 1995, August of 1995.
If you've been around for a minute and have been reading romance for a minute, it's always a little risky to go back and reread or read older romances. This is not by any means or stretch of the imagination the oldest one.
Nope.
But it does contain elements that you would not find in a romance nowadays. Seth,
all right,
what is this book about?
We meet Sebastian Verlaine, who is a member of the Ton, and he never really expects to become a magistrate, judging crimes of just people and like tenants that live in his area. And he attends a hearing of this woman. She's known as like a fallen woman. Her name is Rachel Wade. And she's been in prison for 10 years, and she just got released. And she's back, facing trial because she is caught without money and she's living in a barn, and apparently that's illegal at that time to not have a home and just be living on the streets. Anyways, so Sebastian right off the bat is intrigued by her and is kind of curious about her situation, and so he decides to take it upon himself to kind of vouch for her and offer her a place to stay and work as his housekeeper. And for her, it's either prison or working for Sebastian. And so she chooses to work for Sebastian and starts her new life in a job where she feels zero confidence in, and she literally just came out of prison and she's expected to be a housekeeper to like this grand house. Anything like she just has no confidence whatsoever, and she starts to get into her role, and then she's also expected to kind of, I don't even know where to go from this. Anyways, she basically is given a second chance at life, but like she kind of is faced with Sebastian, who kind of feels owed. He feels owed.
He's very predatory.
Yeah.
In the earlier parts of this book.
Yeah. And he believes that because he freed her, he also has rights to her body.
He did not do it out of the kindness of his heart.
No.
He was just very, very turned on by the idea of having power over someone who is utterly powerless.
Yes. Okay, that being said, the story goes from there, and they start to kind of find themselves on a playing field where emotions are involved, and maybe, things happen between them, and it's more so her trying to find herself again and him allowing her to find herself and also make amends.
The way that I found this book was through Instagram. Someone posted, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, but someone posted like anti-heroes, books with
Okay.
anti-heroes, or like just ambiguous kind of characters. And this book was on the list, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll check it out. And I read the blurb, and I was like, okay, sounds interesting. Well, actually, it was already on my TBR, as every book is, but, it's always a good thing to have a refresher and be like, oh, yeah, okay, that book. And then I went and I read a couple reviews. You can imagine that this is a very divisive book.
Yeah.
There are people who read it and find worth in the complexity of the story at play, and then there are people who read it and they just absolutely cannot look past certain things, rightfully so.
Yeah.
And they don't like the book as a result, which is totally fine. But that makes me intrigued. When I see a book like that gets very opposite, kinds of reviews.
Yeah, they're polar opposites, for
Yeah.
sure.
I'm intrigued. And one reviewer in particular, in her review, and this was a reviewer who really liked the book, she described this book as she was saying essentially that for her, how she sees it is up until the turning point, which we can discuss later on for Sebastian, he is not a romantic hero, nor is he portrayed as such. And then after that turning point is where he actually becomes the romantic hero of the book. And I kind of agree with that, but we can talk about that later on.
I agree with that as well.
As for what I thought of this book, I actually really, really enjoyed this book. It surprised me how much I enjoyed it. And I think most of all, the reason why I enjoyed it so much is because of how complex it is, how intricate it is, how deep it is in the characters' journeys, emotional, psychological journeys. Yes, it does touch upon really dark subjects, meaning like the heroine literally gets raped by her future love interest. But the author did certain things in subtle ways, or not, actually, I shouldn't say subtle ways, not subtle ways at all. Like, I really appreciated how the book, at no point, and Sebastian for that matter, lets you forget what he did.
Yes.
And I think that that's an important part of the story for me. And what really took this book and made me like it, because it could have easily gone into the section, I don't know, kind of iffy, don't know if I can, find anything in this type of thing, which, sorry, I'm going on and on and on, but earlier this year I read The Flame and the Flower by Kathleen Woodiwiss, I think her name is. That was like on my reading bucket list, just because like I believe it's kind of one of the first romance novels ever written, and if you know anything about that book, the hero also rapes the heroine in that book. And for me, that book was a complete miss. Like, I do not see what other people see in that book at all. And after reading this book, I think the difference was made very apparent to me, and it's that the novel doesn't let you forget that he did what he did, and he actually regrets it, whereas the hero in The Flame and the Flower is just like, it's brushed over, it's like totally expected of him, kind of like, the girl, she just accepts that, and like it's never really revisited in any way, shape, or form. He doesn't care, he acts like it never freaking happened, and to me that's like the no. So I hope we can get into like the journeys for both of our characters, because I think that that's where this book shines.
Yeah.
What about you, Seth?
Well, I feel like you basically said a lot of important points I wanted to hit, which is great. Like you, I appreciated this book and I appreciated what it was trying to convey in terms of like the messages and also like the characters' journeys, both characters. And I totally agree with that point that you just made about the other reviewer, the other person that read the book. And yeah, I never saw him as romantic interest at the beginning of the story. I saw the beginning of the story more of her like acclimating to her new situation and like kind of her start to her journey and like I don't know. I found the story to be intriguing and I did enjoy a lot of it. I think the story is important to talk about and I think we can maybe touch upon certain points obviously that are a no-no. But like you, I did read other books from the 80s and the 90s where like rape very much happened between the heroine and the hero and it wasn't really discussed or touched upon in the way that this book really kind of went in deep in that situation and like talked about the rights and the wrongs and the hero actually recognizing that it was wrong. Of course, I read books like in the 90s and like the 80s where like the heroine recognizing it was rape, but like the hero never did. But in this case, it
Exactly,
was,
yeah.
yeah, in this case, it was more so like, yeah, him recognizing and growing from that. And I thought that was really important to see. And also her journey was really, really, really just like so notable and
Emotional.
just so well done.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah.
I was thinking about this book, and I was thinking, like, how can I recontextualize this book so that it makes sense to me?
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that, like, how can I configure how to view this book in my own brain so that I'm allowed to see worth in it, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
that's kind of messed up, that like you have to figure out ways to make it worth, you know, you talking about it or you liking it just because it touches upon very taboo subjects. But that's kind of just the life of a romance reader, especially, but probably, you know, any reader. Like
Yeah.
whenever there's taboo subjects like that, you kind of automatically feel like you can't like certain things, or that you
Or
shouldn't
can
say that you,
vocalize your like
yeah.
about certain aspects. Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about it, I was like, this book came out in 95, which I would say is when there was probably a shift happening within the romance genre itself.
Mm-hmm.
From the old kind of romance to more what we know today.
Yeah.
You know, the tropes were being twisted and, you know, sort of changed to better fit the world that we live in, the values that we have, that we, you know, fight for. And so to me, I like to see Sebastian's journey as kind of an embodiment of that switch. You know, in the very
Okay.
beginning part of the book, he's very much the old school romance hero.
Yes.
Unapologetic, kind of cruel in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
dark.
And really
Um,
perverse. Like his character and like
oh,
the
yeah.
pleasure. He literally got hard from seeing her in like a position of like, need.
Powerlessness. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's predatory. He rapes her, which was absolutely typical of heroes at that, you know, well,
Yes.
before this time. And then in the second half, he very much becomes what we now expect of romance heroes.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a switch. Like it wasn't just a flip to it for it
No,
not to be
yeah.
believable. It was like a growth. And yeah, no, I agree with that statement.
Well, it is, but at the same time, it is kind of a quick switch just in that turning point for him, that turning scene, because and that makes sense to me. I don't think that devalues the
No.
switch for him, because there are instances in your life where you actually go through something that's truly traumatic, or really shows you something that you had been blinding yourself to, like, you know, that you've been like trying to avoid thinking about, and then suddenly it's blasted in front of you and you kind of
Yeah.
can't avoid it anymore, and
Yeah.
that's a switch for you, you know? So it doesn't matter to me if it is, you know, more of a quick switch, but, you know, the work doesn't end there, and that's the important part, you know. There's realizing, and then there's working towards becoming a better person afterwards. You know, the
Yeah.
realization is not the end of it.
No.
So yeah, I like to think of his character arc in that way, of really seeing on page the switch from old school romance heroes to nowadays romantic
Yeah.
heroes.
No, that's a cool take. I didn't really think about that, but
All right. So, where should we start?
let's start at the beginning. I would say let's talk about Rachel and where we
Yeah.
find her.
Yeah. So, this book actually has a lot of interesting, important conversations, I feel like, and a lot of them revolve around Rachel, her
Yeah.
life, what she went through. So as you said, Rachel was a convict. She went to prison for 10 years for a crime that she did not commit. But, you know, nobody cares about that. Because she is a woman and she supposedly killed her husband, and, you know, that's that. She has to pay the price. The way she's written in that first half of the book is so amazingly well done. Like,
Yeah.
the little details in how she perceives herself now that she's out of prison. And I'm gonna warn you right away, dear listener, I'm gonna pull out a lot of quotes today. So you're gonna have to bear with my reading, which is not the best, I will admit. But I do feel like it's important just because it is, you know, a touchier subject. I kind of just want to pull quotes so that you can hear what the quotes are and kind of hopefully think about them and, like, think about what you think they might mean to you. And Seth and I can discuss what we think those might mean to us. First thing that I noticed in her experience as someone who, you know, had just come out of prison after 10 years, she finds pleasure in control.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's like little tiny insignificant things that she gets to choose for herself, she's like so amazed at the fact that she finally gets to make those little choices.
Mm-hmm.
And that kills me. It kills me because all her rights have been stripped for 10 years.
Yeah.
She
She has
couldn't
no,
choose
like,
anything.
autonomy
Exactly.
for 10 years. She was just a number.
So she says, the little thrill in her chest at this elementary but powerful act, controlling light and darkness in her own room, would probably fade soon, like her awareness that the bed was too soft. How quickly one could adjust to the unspeakable luxuries of freedom. Like, isn't that insane? Like, just
Yeah.
the fact that she's able to control something as small as the lights in her own room gives her a sense of power.
No, it's insane. And, like, I honestly feel like the way that she's written is so interesting to me because of, like, where we started. And, like, of course, when we first meet her, it's in Sebastian's perspective. And, like, we see her and he believes her to be, like, an old woman. You know, she just looks haggard and, like,
her
ancient.
hair is graying because
Yeah.
of the stress that she's been under.
Yeah, and, like, he just describes her as, like, an older woman, and he's like, but I'm still intrigued. But, like, the fact that we find out later on that she's actually pretty young. She was only 28. She got charged with murdering her husband at 18. Like, she was a child.
Well, she married him. She was 16, right?
No, she was married
to him for a week. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so she was 18. Yeah, so just, like, the fact that, like, just her appearance has also, like, been brought down to, like, you know.
She's literally skin and bones. Like, she
Yes.
literally cannot make it from her room to the dinner table that first night without fainting. It's horrifying.
I know. So, yeah, just even her physical description at the beginning was just it intrigued me, and I also was like, what the heck? Like, how, like, what's going on here? And then, like, as you slowly get to be in her perspective, and like you said, see her change, and like see her just like having like the smallest control ever, was monumental. And it's like it just keeps growing from there in her character.
Yeah. And then the flip side to that is because she's never or hasn't been able to make little choices like that for herself in 10 years, she also gets a lot of anxiety out of
Yeah,
having to make choices. She
because
says, oh,
she
sorry.
does. Oh, sorry, you have a quote.
She, I do. I'm warning you guys. A lot of quotes incoming. She says the simplest choices could still freeze her in place, petrify her with fear of the potentially drastic ramifications of every innocent act.
No, and like also, if you think about it, kind of her life became all about choices. She became a housekeeper, and she is the person that's supposed to be making all these big choices for the whole house. And to going from no choice whatsoever, not no ability on like making choices, to like now making choices for a whole estate is insane.
And the other thing that really not shocked me, but really made me feel for her is when she's looking at her family photo of
Mm.
her and her family, and she literally has to cover her own face because it makes her feel distressed. I still think it's very telling of the intelligence behind this book that like little details like that are taken into account, because when you have gone through something traumatic, and in this case something traumatic that lasts an incredibly long time, you can sometimes feel very disconnected from the person you were before and the person you are now, to the
Mhm.
point where you do not even recognize yourself. I think later on she even says like she thinks back to that girl and she thinks of that girl that she was as a stranger.
Yeah,
It's no longer her. That past life no longer belongs to her. It was taken away when her freedoms were taken away.
exactly.
Um and she covers her face because she wants to look at her family members and remember them, you know, lovingly and fondly, but she can't bring herself to see what happened to her, to be confronted with the changes in herself.
It was done in a way where like it's not told to you. It's more so like you kind of pick up on it. And for Rachel, it's just like it's heartbreaking that the girl she was 18 like at 18 is not the girl she is now, and like you said, it was taken away from her. But not only that, it's just like her like family support was taken away from her. Her own
Yeah.
like brother didn't even support her, and like
Her
her
brother
parents,
left.
he left, he moved to Canada, and her
It was too
parents
hard.
kind of they believed she was guilty. They believed she killed her husband. And it's just no, I was just gonna say, and like just that idea of her not having anyone, it's just like heartbreaking. And she kind of finds solace in just like a piece of paper, like a picture. And like even like down to like having friends. She didn't really have any friends. Well, she did, Lydia, until she finally found like actual substantial bonds with the pastor's wife.
But at the same time, again, I like the complexity of her own relationship to her family, especially once she's in prison and they come to visit her that first time, and she explains
Mhm.
how she was essentially put in a
In a
box.
cage on
And
the ground. Yeah.
yeah, and they were put in a cage as well, and they were looking at her like that, and they had to submit to a very intrusive body search, which she was subjected to monthly.
Yeah.
um and it was hard for them, and it must be very hard to have to go through that and then only to sit in front of your loved one. Her parents, I don't think they were, you know, particularly close to her, but they were also not bad parents. I think they cared at the very least about their child.
Yeah.
It must be so hard to do all that, and then what you get as a visual of this person that you care about is them in a cage, looking haggard, like you said, and probably
Hair
traumatized.
shaved off at that point, probably wearing like a stained
Her
shift.
femininity completely ripped away from her.
Yeah.
Her agency ripped away from her. And that also has repercussions on, because I said how she covers her face in the pictures, but even her own body, the way that she talks about her body is as something distant from her as well. She says that her body is cheap, that it's separate from her, that it doesn't matter to her. And that plays into the rape itself.
Yeah.
I think Sebastian, he's angry at her lack of response, her lack of anger, her lack of emotion when it comes to what the hell happened to her.
Yeah.
And he doesn't understand that. And for her, when it happens, she's thinking, well, he's using my body. That's nothing that hasn't been done. My body hasn't been mine in 10 years and a week, because God knows that fucking husband took a lot of things from her as well, emotionally, spiritually, etc., physically. It's almost like she's looking at what's happening to her from a distance.
I totally agree with that.
It's so interesting.
It is very interesting, and the way it's done is interesting. And like you said, it's Sebastian is angry about it, and also he's angry at the fact that she's unwilling to share her past with him at the beginning of the story. And he just finds out little tidbits, and like he kind of wants to like have that control again and like understand what's going on. And it's just, I don't know, I just feel like it was just an interesting start to their journey together.
Yeah. She's very much a shell.
Yeah.
At that point. She talks also, another quote, she talks about anger, because speaking of him, being kind of like, why aren't you angry? And this actually comes from a scene where after the turning points, which we can talk about the turning point after, but well, do we want to talk about the turning point now, actually?
Well, we didn't really even talk about I guess we did talk about the rape, but we don't need to spend too much time on it.
Yeah, what is there to say? He wants to feel power. He feeds off of the thought of overpowering her, of possessing her body, of owning her. And he does what he does because he believes it's his right at that point, and he, in his brain, his messed up brain at that point, he thinks, literally, I warned her that this would happen. She has been warned, and I am tired of waiting. And at that point, her reaction is, okay, I knew it was coming. Here it is. I'm just gonna have to live through it.
Yeah.
And I will, because my body means nothing to me anyway.
Yeah, because, like, for her, she's also thinking, like, I kind of lived through it already with my husband.
Exactly.
And, yeah, we can talk about the husband, too, but, he was just a disgusting piece of shit, and he was he was into, like, dominating and, like, also, like, I feel like he was a sadist.
Not in consensual ways.
Not in consensual ways, yes. His partner was never consensual. That being said, she experienced that, and she's like, what could be worse,
Yeah.
And it happens. He does rape her, and it happens more than once, sad to say.
Yeah.
But Rachel's very disassociated from it, and that's just the extent of that from...
Yeah. It's also worth pointing out that he intrudes her life in various ways, not just through the rape, but, he makes sure that he intrudes upon her time, by scheduling appointments that don't need to happen.
And also he goes into her bedroom quite often.
Yes, he, I guess you could say intrudes upon what she can wear, in the sense that he's tired of seeing her in the same dresses, so he tells her, go buy more dresses, I'm tired of seeing you in this black dress, which we introduced the brown.
Yes, the brown dress.
We love a practical girl.
Yeah. All right, we can talk about the turning point now if you wanted, unless you had another point. So basically the turning point is Sebastian is feeling a sort of like connection with Rachel, and he's kind of scared by it, and he doesn't like this dependency he also feels with her.
Yeah.
So he kind of invites his friends from London, and his friends, I'm saying that very loosely,
Yeah.
they're not the nicest bunch, and they're spoiled, rich, like basically trust fund kids. And they're also, I think, a prostitute also there. She's just hanging about. No, she wasn't a prostitute. Sorry, she was
No,
someone's
yeah.
wife.
Yeah.
And she just is with her lover at the time, and that so happens to be one of his friends. So they're having dinner basically, and he instructs Rachel to plan the dinner, host the dinner, and also attend. So she is expected to sit with his friends and just be a part of the gathering. And he doesn't stop his friends from asking her questions about her time in prison. And they're very, very lewd questions and just very personal questions. And they get her whole backstory about her being in prison and what she went about and like the punishments she experienced in prison. And so basically, what happens is one of his friends,
Sully.
Mr. Sully, there you go. See, I don't remember his name, sorry. Mr. Shelley basically is like to Sebastian. He's like, so is she yours? And Sebastian's like, no. And then so Scully?
Sully.
Mr.
Asshole.
Scully, whatever the heck his name is, decides that he's gonna go pursue Rachel because she's left for the night. He decides that it is his due to also make use of her body, and he goes to try and rape her. But Sebastian kind of has a wake-up call, and he's like, no, that's not happening, and goes and beats up Mr. Sully. So why is that the turning point? Why is this the turning point for everyone?
He says in prison they'd even robbed her of the freedom of her own body. So had her husband. So had he. Which is an important thing to note.
And he's saying this all in his head right now.
Yeah. How long would she let it go on? For as long as he'd known her, she'd never surrendered to anything, not really, no matter how callously he'd treated her. But this was different. This was worse. He was letting it happen, watching it grow more beastly by the minute, because he wasn't testing her anymore. He was testing himself. And that's where you see what kind of mindset set that up for him. He was trying to prove to himself that he could still be exactly how his friends are. Because, you said, like, they're kind of a, fucked up bunch of people. Well, he includes himself in that fucked up bunch of people, and he was trying to prove to himself that that was still very, very much him. And then he says, a little bit later on, he says, because why did he stop it, And he says, it's because I saw myself when I looked at Sully and the others, heard my voice in their voices. What they did was despicable. And they were the mirror of me. I could see it clearly, and it revolted me. I was glad when Sully drew the knife because that gave me permission to kill him. I wanted to kill him, wring his neck, stop his heart. You won't believe it, but I know that it was the vileness in myself I wanted to kill. And that's a turning point, clearly.
That was the turning point.
And that's what I mean by... You could say it happens quickly, but to me, the realization is only the first step. And this for him was that, it only took that one instance to make him realize just how wrong and how he wronged her. And it's extremely telling that he wants to kill Sully because deep down he wants to kill himself for what he did to her.
For what he's done to her, yeah. Yeah, no, and I think it's really important the way the change happened in him. And I feel like it kind of was, yes, he invited those people there, to have the party and also kind of remind himself that this is who he is. But it kind of backfired on him, and he's like, actually, I don't want to be this anymore. And we also need to recognize, we didn't mention, he lived in London, and then once he got this house, he moved here just for a bit, and he ended up staying there longer than he thought. And so his whole mindset kind of changed in terms of like Rachel, but also like he started seeing himself doing different things as well in the city versus the country.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like you said, the recognition of like his wrongs was the first step. And I don't know, I just felt like it was so interesting to me for him to see his own self in Sully. And I liked how it was more so like an internal recognition, and it wasn't like voiced until later on, but like in his head he knew he had to change things, and he knew he had to right the wrongs, and he wanted her to be happy, and he wanted like we didn't talk about this yet, but like his little like his goals, his two goals that he had.
Wait, I'm not there yet.
What else do you want to talk about?
Well, hold on a minute. They have this conversation right after it happens. Well, he's kind of down for a couple days, you know, he's got this wound, and like he doesn't want anyone to treat it but her.
Oh yeah.
And they have this conversation in the bathroom, sitting on the bath. And he asks her about why is she not angry. He wants her to be angry at what he did, at him, at his own actions. And she's not. And he doesn't understand that. And she has this moment when, in her own head, during that conversation, she finds herself going down the path of trying to justify him, what he did. And then she literally puts a stop to it, and she says, why am I trying to justify what he did?
Yeah.
And I just think it's little moments like this that really change the book for me, that really take it from something that's very surface level, very much of its time, very much like not trying to do anything, to something that's actually much more complex than that, and actually for me tries to say something, tries to take what was the genre at the time and tries to insert in it change. And
no, I agree with that. And I feel like in this book, I haven't read anything else by Patricia Gaffney, but I feel like in this book she really shines in her internal monologues, or like the narration for these characters. And there's so many things that are said in their heads that aren't said on page, like to each other, which I mean, like, I don't know, I just loved it. I just think the writing of this book was really well done, and I actually really do want to read more books by her.
Yeah, and that bathroom scene ends with, well, maybe not ends with, but, you know, during that, he asks her, call me Sebastian. Because up until that point, he had been forcing her, more or less, to call him my lord, and was taking a lot of pleasure out of putting himself on a pedestal compared to her, you know, of being higher than her. And in that scene, he asks her, call me Sebastian, please. And at first, she won't do it. She finds it very hard to just let go of the title, let go of the power imbalance between them, and actually call him Sebastian. And when she does, he's like, see, it's not that hard. When we call each other by our names, we actually become of the same level. You know, I am not above you, you're not below me.
Yeah, and for him, he also said, like, it got rid of a lot of barriers between them, and then she's like, in her head, she's like, not the ones that we can't surpass, you know?
Yeah.
And I felt like that was really important because, like you mentioned, him being called my lord, he literally found sexual pleasure from that.
Exactly.
And he just yearns to finally be on, like, equal grounding with her, and with all that, you know, him cementing in call me my lord, he's kind of caused this, like you said, her inability to just recognize him as Sebastian first.
Yeah. Which brings us to what you wanted to talk about, which is his two goals.
Yes.
His two immediate goals in regards to her. Do you want to say what they are?
During their times, you know, sexually, she is unable to release, you know, to reach pleasure, to come, to orgasm, whatever you want to call it.
She can feel pleasure. She just can't reach,
she
doesn't,
ending,
the grand
she's
finale.
more so just, like, disassociated from everything. She's just, like, anyways. So he recognizes that, and he realizes that she's never was able to come before. She never had an orgasm before. So his two goals, I kind of, maybe three, but let's go with two. He wants her to laugh because he's never heard her laugh. And the second, he wants her to be able to orgasm. And he also ultimately just wants her to be happy and like find peace. But yeah. Those are some great goals to have.
They are. And while I think it's very easy to just overlook them as corny, I actually think it's much deeper than that, especially when you really analyze Rachel as a character, because Rachel, as we said before, has had no agency over her body for the better part of 10 years, and she sees herself as separate from it. And so, to me, for him to want to see her experience pleasure in that way, to be able to reach that peak of trust, because it is, you have to be able to make yourself vulnerable and trust the person that you're with to take you there, and trust your own body that it will take you there. It demands that you are reconnected with your body, that you are in the present, the moment, anchored to yourself. And so for him to have that goal is actually very important. It's very important that she be able to reach that, because it means that she's doing she's on that journey to reconnecting with herself fully, and retaking her own agency and control over her own body in that way. Yeah.
And I also feel like it's important to note that it's also two selfless goals on Sebastian's part. From him being such a selfish man.
He says it's very selfish, though. He says, like, I actually want to see her smile, I
mean, yes, selfless, but I also feel like ultimately his goal is her happiness. And
yeah, of course.
He obviously wants to be a part of her happiness, but he just ultimately wants to see her, like you said, trust herself and trust others, at least.
It's also interesting that their sexual acts involve some bondage and such, because it does kind of right the wrong that her husband did in a way. I think without them having to discuss it, he knows that she needs to be put back into that experience, but in a positive way where she doesn't feel helpless and powerless. During the rape scene, there is no bondage, though Lord knows he for sure threatened. But he doesn't actually do it. But during their sex scenes afterwards, that's when he introduces that, as though he knows that that's what she needs. She needs to relive that in order to gain back her trust, because it's in that situation that she lost that trust to begin with. So again, it's just little things like that. Like, was Patricia Gaffney reading on BDSM at the time? I don't know. I just find it fascinating that she thought of that.
And I even feel like, just going down to like their sex scenes as well, like from the beginning, I just feel like the change of tone in each sex scene is important. Like, because when it was rape, it was
pulling, it was like parting.
The words used were very mechanical and robotic.
Yes, it was like very intrusive. Like the language used was intrusive.
Yeah. And then it becomes more gentle and, like, dare I say, even sweet, as he's trying to get her to, reach that pinnacle. And then when she's able to orgasm, it becomes really sexy and present. Yeah. I love it. So, it was really great written. Like, those scenes were really well written.
So this brings us to the husband and the deep emotional and physical scarring that resulted from just 1 week. It doesn't take much, but this is an historical romance novel, so we are in a time period where someone like Rachel, who was probably raised as quite innocent, she was in a not wealthy family per se, but,
well off.
a well-off family. She went to a good school and everything, so she for sure was not aware that these sort of things exist, that they, and she probably wasn't aware of what a true, caring, or healthy, at the very least, marriage looks like.
No, of course not.
And this man walks into her life. So you said, you mentioned Lydia. She met Lydia at school.
Mm-hmm.
They became fast friends. Lydia was always talking about her father like he was the best of fathers. And I say that with a facial expression. We can talk about it later on.
We will, we'll touch upon it once we reach the end of the,
So she had this sort of picture of who the father might be.
Mm-hmm.
Through the eyes of Lydia, who was very much like, painting him with glorious colors.
Yeah.
And she meets the father, and he gives her bad vibes.
He does. He does.
But her mother, who is trying to get her married, sees an opportunity and really pushes for Rachel to, get involved with this man. Listen, he is not much older. He's not that old. He is.
No, he was in his 30s. He was in his 30s, and he was described as really attractive and like charismatic and like. Yeah.
The reason why I think I got confused at the beginning, I think she meets him when she's 16, but they don't get married until she's 18. I think she's around him for that time.
Yes.
And at first he gives her bad vibes, but then they enter this courtship. And right away, he becomes extremely charming. He says all the right things. He totally wins over her parents. And she thinks, well, maybe my original impression was wrong. Maybe I just, I don't know. Maybe I was just wrong. I guess he's a great guy. And, Lydia sings his praises. So she must be right. He's their father.
Yeah.
So they get married, and obviously, this is a clear pattern that we know at this point. The pattern of the abuser turns extremely charming, and then the second that he's got you in his clutches, or the second that they have you in their clutches, it turns horribly, horribly wrong. And it does.
Yeah.
This man, like we said, he's a
sadist.
He is. He's into humiliating her. He's into just completely taking away her control. But obviously, like we said, not in a consensual or discussed manner. She was thrust into that world. She didn't know anything about it. She never
Exactly, and I
accepted
highly doubt she knew anything about sex either. I don't think her...
Exactly. She probably didn't know it wasn't normal.
Yes,
at the time.
Exactly.
She was probably told, well, sex is very uncomfortable, you're going to hate it. And she was very uncomfortable and she hated it. So she probably thought, like, okay, well, fine.
Exactly. They were supposed to leave for their honeymoon, I believe, and then cut to her, like, people finding her with her dead husband, full of blood all over her. And it is presumed that she killed her husband.
And obviously, it takes her a long time in the book to actually open up about this to Sebastian, but not just to Sebastian, to us as well as readers. We don't know the full truth for a very long time. And when she finally does open up to him, she has a sentence which I find very interesting. She says... she's talking to him, telling him what happened, blah, blah, blah. And she says, he was all she had. Even though he'd abused her, he'd abused that power more times than either of them could count. He supposed it was a measure of her aloneness that he was still the one in whom she'd confided. Sorry, I said it was her. It was him. He's thinking that. Isn't that so freaking sad?
It is so sad, and, like, of course, like, the situation made it so that he was her only confidant. And I also feel like for her, she also was moved to tears when he automatically was like, yeah, so then who did it? It wasn't you. Because no one had that certainty. No one believed in her that much that she didn't kill this person. And I feel like, yeah, that's so tragic, because looking at Rachel and who she was at 18, I like, obviously I don't think she was obviously capable of murder. No one thought so, but yet automatically they believed she was capable of murder, and they deemed her a murderer, and then
Yeah.
her future was taken from her.
Yeah, and two aspects of the complexity of her psychological the psychological place where she's at that point is, A, she starts wondering, and even still, you know, when she's talking to Sebastian, even still, she wonders if she is in part to blame for, quote unquote, and that's how she puts it, selling herself to that man. That she should have listened to her instincts and she should have walked away when, you know, she felt that he was a little iffy, but she didn't, and maybe she should blame herself. And again, I mean, this is, we are all recognizing this as, you know, patterns that victims go through of being like, maybe I should have done this differently, maybe I should have done that, maybe I shouldn't have worn that, maybe I shouldn't have said that.
Exactly.
Etc. The other interesting thing here, that says a lot about where she's at mentally, in certain instances, when she thinks about the murder, she sometimes wonders if she actually might have done it. And that's so important because and again, this is, you know, victims. Did I like it? Did I invite this? Did I enjoy it? Maybe I enjoyed it. Maybe it wasn't rape, or maybe it wasn't abuse, or maybe it wasn't. You start, your brain starts spiraling like that. I think it's a coping mechanism at the end of the day, but the fact that she thinks about the murder and she thinks, maybe I did do it. Maybe I'm crazy and I forgot that I didn't do it, but I did do it.
No, but it's also, I think we should also talk about, like, there's so many people that are convicted these days that are kind of, like, forced to believe a lie, and, like, once they're told the lie so many times over and over and over, they start to believe it, and also kind of in their head, they kind of take it upon themselves, and they believe that they are, you know, guilty of that crime. So I feel like in that case, Rachel was told over and over and over again that she did indeed kill her husband, and maybe a part of her kind of believed that lie.
Yeah. And in that moment, or at that part of the book, Sebastian actually becomes exactly who she needs to have in her life, because he hears her say all these things and he doesn't let her believe them.
Yes.
He becomes that person that whenever she has thoughts like that of, maybe I'm to blame, maybe I sold myself, maybe I did murder him, whatever, he continuously tells her, no, you didn't. You are worthy.
Yeah.
No, you're not going to let this control your life. You are worth it. You are worth your own happiness. Do not fear being happy. Do not fear this. And I think it becomes so fucking important because in those instances, Sebastian is not actually a romantic hero. He becomes a friend.
Yes.
And that's so fucking important, especially for a character like him, especially after what he fucking did. To show that he's able to be present for her even when it doesn't involve romantic feelings, you know, any sort of end, you know, for him. Like he's
also,
not
like an exchange. Like he's not getting anything.
Like he's
from
purely
being her
just
friend.
being there for her.
Yes.
And not letting that tiny little voice in her head get to her. You know, he's being the other voice that's saying to her, you are fucking worth it. I don't want to hear you say stuff like that. You know it's bullshit, and I'm gonna make you believe it because it's true.
No, and like from there on, like then on, their relationship starts to grow into something else, and you know, sex gets reintroduced, and she still can't, you know, reach that pinnacle. She still can't orgasm, and it's like not even a trusting at that point, because I think she also does say that she does trust him. I said does a million times, but yeah, at that point she trusts him, but she still can't reach that.
I have two little quotes because you just mentioned trust.
Yeah.
So first off, Sebastian realizes the power, for lack of a better word, of gentleness for
Mm-hmm.
Rachel. He says it had taken him an unconscionably long time to figure out that it was gentleness that devastated Rachel, not rootlessness. Because, yeah, you know, for someone who has never been shown gentleness, or at least not in a very long time, she's used to being used. She's
Yeah.
used to being overpowered. She's
And taken
used to
advantage
being,
of and
yes,
just used as like
she's not
someone's.
used to kindness.
Exactly. Yes.
And that scares her, and that's part of why she won't let herself be happy, because she realizes there's a lot more to lose when you let yourself be happy than
And
if you
when
just
you have good
continue.
things in your life, it's just she
Yes.
fears that being taken from her. Because let's also
Yeah.
not like we can't forget she's also still she's kind of like in the parole process. She still has to go visit the sheriff and the constable as well every week. So she still doesn't feel the freeness that she thought she would have felt.
And as far as trust, he says it came to him that he'd been wrong all along about what he really wanted from Rachel. Power, he'd thought. The ability to control her. But that wasn't it at all. What he wanted was trust. And the thing she'd just done told him he finally had it. This is when she's, you know, finally, she tells the whole truth. Because it does take a couple encounters, if you will, for her to actually reveal the whole thing. You know, she does it bits by bits. And then it says, he presses his lips to her shoulder blade. Thank you, he whispered, conscious of the inadequacy of the words. He thanks her for trusting him, because he knows just how much that means.
And how much it took out of her, too,
Yes.
to put that trust in someone else, to put that belief
he
in
doesn't
someone
take
else.
it for granted that she trusts him, of all people, him, enough to open up. And
he didn't give her a choice, though. He's like, there's no one else but me.
True, but, you know, at that point, she has her friend, you know, the lady friend.
Yeah.
She has other people in her life, and yet she still comes back to him because he's offering her something that she needs. And that, and I think in a way, it must be kind of freeing to go to a man like that who has hurt you, and then you can open up more honestly, because you think he's already hurt me, so whatever I say, he can't hurt me more.
Exactly.
I'm already there, you know, whereas going to her other friend would make her more vulnerable, probably, because now she's got to open up to someone who could hurt her, who has never hurt her. So I think that's part of why she keeps coming back to him. Obviously, she loves him as well, but, you know, I just think it's it's important how kindness and trust become, you know, so pivotal to their relationship, especially how it started.
Yeah, and I feel like trust is a new thing for her, and like she is afraid to put that trust in anyone else. And of course she has this bond with Sebastian, but even like you said, Anne, who is the priest's wife, she does feel like a kinship with her, but she still fears her judgment. She fears everyone else's judgment because at this point she's labeled as basically a whore. She's labeled as Sebastian's mistress, and that's living under his roof, and literally everyone doesn't talk to her but Anne. And yeah, I just think it's a lot happening at once for Rachel.
Should we talk about mental health? We've mentioned, and you just did, Lydia. Lydia is an incredibly troubled person. She has gone through horrifying things that no child should grow up experiencing.
And this is just a trigger warning. I think we should also mention here as well. We're going to be talking about parental abuse and
incest, pedophilia.
Yes.
So her amazing father was having sexual relationships with her from a young age. And again, there is research put in this book, like, on the actual mindset of victims of
Yeah.
abuse like this, victims of incestuous relationships, where they still love that person. And they were made to love that person. And to them, what they have is special. You know, they are treated like no other. And they feel special for having that connection
Yeah.
with their parent. And this is very much what happens with Lydia. She, having this relationship with her father, obviously doesn't understand how wrong it is. It's just what she knows. But it's fracturing her mentally, psychologically, and she sees Rachel entering the same relationship with her father, and that creates a lot of jealousy for Lydia, because now her special relationship with her father, she doesn't have it anymore. No, you know, when she was saying, my father is amazing, I have the best father in the world, she truly believed that.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a lie. She truly believed. She felt special.
No, I was just going to say, and also I think we should mention, but I feel like we talk about it. Lydia herself doesn't have any comparison to what a father-like relationship should be. She obviously probably doesn't talk about, you know, sex with her father with her friends, because obviously that, you know, sex is still taboo, and also just like maybe she thinks in her head it's normal. Maybe that's just how relationships are. And I don't know, I just feel like her character, yes, she was very malicious and, you know, hateful towards Rachel, as we got to experience her 10 years later. But I think that speaks to her own mental break and like what she's been through as a woman and as a child. Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
So she is the one who killed her father.
Yes, in a fit of rage and jealousy.
Yeah. And she is not getting any better with years. She is, in fact, becoming more and more fractured. She's not well. And I think it'd be easy to just see her as insane or whatever.
Yeah.
But I actually think the book works towards making you understand where she comes from. And obviously Rachel understands that as well. This is just someone who is distressed, who is in distress, who has been living her whole life in distress.
Yeah.
And you can't blame them, you know? At the end of the day, I don't think Rachel blames her for sending her to prison.
No, and I think it's really important that no one else blamed her either. Even her aunt that was taking care of her, and even the judge, and even the pastor, and everyone else was like, poor child, poor girl that she's been through all of this, instead of saying she tempted her father. It was more so like, he is a vile, despicable creature, to put that on his daughter. And yeah, I just like, it's just heartbreaking that a person can go through that. I know she's a book character, but there's so many instances where this is the truth and this is reality for a lot of people.
Yeah. And so I actually commend the author here for how she treats mental health, because God knows the discussion around mental health and mental illnesses has really progressed in the past couple years. But back in 95, I mean, when I was young, like, it wasn't something we talked about.
No.
And we would have said just like, oh yeah, she's insane, whatever, you know, she's not worth it or whatnot. So for this to be written in 95 with such sensitivity towards what it actually means for those people, or for actually truly putting yourself in those shoes and trying to understand a character like that and what she must have gone through and why she's doing the things that she's doing, and she's not at all portrayed as just insane for the sake of the plot, you know. There's a lot of depth to actually how she's written. You don't know that for a while, you know. You kind of wonder, like, what the fuck is wrong with this girl?
You don't know it until like the very end.
Yeah. And then you understand that, like you said, the characters, the way that they react is actually very modern. Not that 95 was not modern, but you know
No,
what I mean?
and
Like, it's very current.
yes, exactly. And I mean, obviously, this all comes out in a letter. The aunt wrote it before she died. But this was Rachel. She's basically back on trial, and she was kind of going to be put into prison again until the truth came out about Lydia. And I think it's unfortunate that it had to come out in such a big room with so many people. And while the pastor was asking for, the judge to step out and let's talk about it, I feel like it was important for Rachel to be cleared of any sort of crime that she could have committed. But at the same time, I
Yeah,
think people needed to recognize, as well as the readers, what Lydia has gone through.
exactly. Exactly. Oh, I just wanted to mention also an important scene for Rachel is at the end when she just before her trial,
Yeah.
she's put in prison again, which is traumatic for her, obviously. She's just gotten out of prison. She's finally finding her freedom again. And she's changed a lot. And I think that's
Yes.
kind of the bittersweet part of it is like she sees herself being put back in that situation. And now that she's experienced so much out of life in that short time since she's been out of prison, she kind of can't imagine herself going back, but she's also resigned to go back.
Yeah.
But she knows it's going to be 10 times harder now because she's found that agency again.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, an important scene for me is when she's talking to the prison guard, the woman.
Yes.
And that woman is, trying to beat her down, and she's already down.
Power tripping.
Power tripping all over the place. She's insulting her. She's being awful, like, a prison guard would be or was, according to Rachel's own experience. And Rachel actually fights back. She
Yes.
confronts that guard, and she tells her, "You're taking pleasure out of kicking someone who's already down. And how does that make you any different than the people that are right here that you're supposed to be guarding?
Mm-hmm.
How does that now make you any worse?"
Yeah,
Yes.
no, exactly. And I love that she had that moment where she did like get in her face and was like, what makes you better? And how dare you, do this and this and this. And I love that she actually questioned the purpose of the warden. And I liked that moment. Of course, like, nothing happened. She wasn't
Yeah.
hurting anything. And I was really grateful for that. But I think for her, for past Rachel, 18-year-old Rachel, up until 28-year-old Rachel, she needed that moment. She needed to revisit.
Exactly.
She needed to,
moment.
like, confront and do things that I think she probably wanted to do at that time, but she was so broken down, and she was finally able to fight that demon in a way.
She healed herself, in other words, through that. She did what she always wanted to do, but was never able to do because she had just, like, left the premises of her own body.
Exactly. Exactly.
Which brings us to what I think is actually the theme of this book.
Okay.
And I think it's the possibility of change.
Mm-hmm.
Or for change. Obviously, here it's taken to the extreme because you have this hero who is messed up, fucked up, does terrible things, and then he changes. He is capable of changing. This is important because for Rachel, she says that the one thing that she acquired in prison was she lost the belief that change is possible.
Yeah.
She lost that belief. And so the whole story is about her realizing that that's a possibility, that everyone's capable of changing, that she can change, that Sebastian can change, that we are all capable of changing. There is no, as long as you realize that what you have been doing is wrong and you want to change and you continuously put in the effort to change and do better,
Yeah.
then the possibility of change is always possible. And obviously, Sebastian, like I said, he's just the embodiment of that, in a quite intense, extreme way, but, for the sake of the book. But so this is why, to me, it's still worth talking about, because I think it's an important message.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wanted to talk briefly about why rape is so present in romance. Why rape and the threat of rape are so present in romance, especially back then, but even now, it's not like completely, disappeared. And rape fantasies. So, I did a little bit of research.
Okay, you, Miss Researcher.
And I actually...
Oh, wait. You came with papers and you print these out.
Do,
what the hell? Oh
yeah,
my
gosh. Yeah, I'm prepared.
Listeners, she came with a printed out article.
Well, because I found an article called Women's Erotic Rape Fantasies, an Evaluation of Theory and Research by Joseph W. Critali and Jenny M. Bivona. And I actually started reading this just out of curiosity. After reading this book, I was like, yeah, why is rape such a huge presence in romance? Has anyone done any research on that?
Yeah.
And what this article tells us essentially is that there hasn't been a whole lot of research, and the reason is it's because it is a taboo subject, and for that reason they do not want to research this. But and they point out something that I find very important. They say that to not study an area that we find difficult to understand or uncomfortable is actually to reinforce that belief in those people that they are wrong, that there's something wrong with them, that and especially in this case, that there is something wrong with female sexuality and your own fantasies as a woman. That's what that reinforces, because as long as it's not researched, then you think, well, maybe I'm alone, or I'm just wrong, or I shouldn't talk about this, blah, blah, blah. And this is a tangent, but this is exactly why I think it's actually important to talk about taboo subjects, to leave in scenes that may make readers uncomfortable. Just because a book is old, you shouldn't take it out, because it actually makes for important conversations. Yes, but it makes for important conversations that we can then have. If we take those out, then how can we ever acknowledge how we have grown as a genre?
No, I totally agree with that, and I feel like having these scenes, these taboo-like scenes, are important, and I also feel like I don't know where I'm going with this, but I also feel like there's some scenes, yes, I do feel like some rape scenes or some scenes of assault are kept in there for entertainment value instead of kind of showing where, like, where the story could go, or, like, the growth from that. And those sometimes I find are really problematic. I think, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I do agree that keeping these scenes in is important if they will further this character growth, I would say.
Yeah. So I was reading this article, right? Not really knowing where it was going.
Yeah.
I was just interested to see what are the theories, because obviously, again, it's all theories, because nothing has been researched enough. But one theory, which I was like, I wasn't looking for this, but it's called adversary transformation, and it talks about romance novels, about the presence of rape in romance novels. And they say, in essence, both romance novels and rape fantasies are created works of fiction. Important. Rape fantasies are fictional in your head. Women do not want this in their real life. Sexual fantasies are self-generated erotic stories, often intentionally initiated to provide enjoyment and sexual arousal. Romance novels are structured erotic fantasies that individuals intentionally expose themselves to, typically for emotional satisfaction and sexual arousal. In a rape fantasy, women create an imaginary scenario and they participate in the fantasy through the rape experience of their self-character. In a romance novel, that includes rape. Women identify with the lead female character and vicariously experience her rape. Why, you may ask?
Yeah.
Well, the theory thinks that in male fiction, the challenge takes... Okay, so essentially, they're now going into how the men do it through fiction and how women do it through fiction and the differences. So in male fiction, the challenge takes the form of a violent confrontation with an evil adversary. You know, the knight kills the dragon. Adversary transformation. In romance novels, there is often a violent confrontation with a dominant, sexually aggressive adversary who appears to be evil. The challenge for the heroine is to conquer his heart, seduce him into falling in love with her, have him voluntarily make a lifetime commitment to her, and transform his apparent evil and cruelty into something more socially acceptable without diminishing his masculinity. This is transformation. This is transformative work.
Yeah.
It's taking something that's traumatic, that's a part of every woman's life. You know, you go out there, and as a woman, at least as a woman of my own age, I don't know about you, Seth.
No, yeah.
I go out there, and I know that rape is a possibility.
Yeah.
The possibility of rape follows us everywhere we go. Sometimes unconsciously, sometimes not.
It's honestly mind-boggling. Like, just for an example, not even in the nighttime, but yes, going on walks in the nighttime, we can't do that, clearly.
It doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen, but there's a trail right by my house that, you know, my parents told me don't walk there because, you know, there's, like, cases where women were raped there. And just the idea that I can't even walk on a trail in the middle of the day because of fear of rape is,
Yeah. So what I'm getting from this is because we live with this omnipresent threat of rape in our lives as women, but, you know, as anyone who's basically not a white male, pretty much.
Yes.
We need to find ways to cope with that. We need to find ways to gain control over that. And I think transformative work where you take that evil, threatening possibility of rape and you actually turn it into what I can actually control this happening to me because it's fake. It's happening to a character. Yes. She is experiencing it. I can distance myself, but I can also empathize and I can deal with my own fears through this. That's how I see it anyway. It's like it's just trying to cope with something and making it ours, you know, finding ways to make it ours because it's not going to happen in our world. You know, we live in a patriarchy. Yeah. It's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to change.
No, sadly, I think you're right. And I feel like that article is really important. We're going to include it in the description of the episodes just if you want to check it out. But honestly, yes. I wish there was more research on this topic, but sadly there isn't. And I feel like this article is important. And thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and they make it very, very clear. Again, there are multiple theories in there, so if you're interested, you can go and see what, you know, theorists have put out there as far as, like, what they think is the reason behind it. This is the one that I personally, you know, aligns the most with what I see in myself and whatever. Yeah. But they make it very clear that this is not a wish fulfillment fantasy. And I think that's part of why people often misunderstand why it exists. Yeah. No, it doesn't mean, oh, I'm fantasizing about this, therefore I want this in my real life. It is not wish fulfillment. It's something else, and we do not know what it is because, like you said, it has not been researched nearly enough. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about To Have and To Hold?
I mean, like, I just had, like, small points. I don't know if you want to find a way to fit it in, because I feel like now it no longer relates to the discussion. So basically, I just wanted to talk about, like, the perception of women and their options during this time, because I feel like we always talk about, like, you know, their limited ability to have control over their life. But in this case, it's more so for Rachel. She didn't have many options at that time. You know, charged with murder. She came out of prison 10 years later, and she was kind of expected to find a job and find a house. But at the same time...
I'm happy you bring this up, because this is actually very important.
Yeah, and at the same time, because she's a convicted criminal, no one wants to hire her as a maid or, like, a housekeeper or anything like that. And because she's a woman, her options are very limited. And I don't think the case would have been the same, obviously, if she was a man, because as a man, you can work on the docks, you can work at the rookery, at the pub, or literally anywhere else. That she, as a woman, because she has a vagina, was not able to work there because maybe fear of rape as well. Yeah. So, anyways, what did you want to talk about that? I just found that really
Well,
disgusting to me.
because it's not unlike today. It's still extremely hard for people who come out of prison to get back on their feet. There are programs in place to try to help them, to try to find them a job. But the thing is, if the system around you, meaning the people around you, your friends, the people you're in contact with, your financial situation aren't different,
Yeah.
those people are likely to just get back into it because they're trying to survive.
And there's no
It's a
options
pattern.
available.
Yeah, it's a pattern that's there because something is lacking. And we are not offering any help as far as helping them where that need is.
Yeah.
And so I loved that Rachel comes out of prison and she says she's trying to look for work, but nobody wants her. There's real prejudices with
No, and like
towards those people.
exactly. And she even tried getting a job as keeping someone's finances, but even that option wasn't available to her. She had
She was
no
competent.
option.
She could have done the job, which is why, she was good at doing it for Sebastian, but
Yeah.
they wouldn't hire her.
And also, I think we should mention her, obviously, her jury, her judge, all of them were males, and they still weren't able to understand that she was unable to find work. They're questioning why she was living in a barn. They're questioning why, like, she claimed she had money, but she didn't. They didn't find it on her person, and that was because it was stolen from her, and it was money she earned in prison.
She was not allowed a fair trial because
She
she
was
was a
not.
woman.
Yes, yes, that is what I was getting at. Yeah,
And Sebastian, for all his mistakes, during that first chapter, he does point out, so what is she guilty of here? She's guilty of not having a home because she has no money and it was stolen from her.
Yeah.
She's guilty of living in the streets because she can't afford living elsewhere. Why is the guilt on her? Why shouldn't the guilt be on us? We failed her.
Yeah.
We are the ones failing these people.
Yeah.
What do you expect them to do?
Yeah. They're like, honestly, she had zero options, and if Sebastian didn't come around and offer her to be his housekeeper, she
His
would
mistress.
probably be back in prison.
Well, I mean, she would. That's where they were sending her.
Yeah.
They were just like, oh, well, we don't really know what to do with your case, so we're just going to throw you back into prison if you don't mind. What the hell?
Yeah, clearly they didn't have, like, housing for people trying to get on their feet back then. The only place to put her was the prison, so...
Also, yeah, we didn't really talk about Sebastian and his own relationship with his family.
Right, yeah.
I briefly mentioned how he doesn't have a purpose. And we've been reading a lot of books lately. I also love that his name is Sebastian. What is up with Sebastians? Like, why are they always cruel at first?
I don't know. I mean, it's a very beautiful name. I mean, Sebastian.
It's a very regal name.
Yes.
Anyways, all this to say, we've mentioned a couple of times on the podcast before how oftentimes people that don't have purpose in life and that do not have connections, meaningful connections in their lives, go down a very dark path.
Yep.
There's nothing that ties them to wanting to move forward and wanting to move in a good direction. Therefore, they often turn bad.
Yeah.
This is what happened with Sebastian here.
Yeah, and he has no, like, moral compass or some sort of rule book to follow. His own mother was awful. His sister, equally awful. His father as well, awful. They were not good parents. They didn't raise their children well. And Sebastian's kind of like thrust into this world, and like it doesn't obviously excuse his actions, but he's thrust into a world trying to figure out where he fits in it, and like also just, just being present. And yeah, we see a little glimpse of his mother and like his father as he's dying, but I mean, you feel the coldness there. I think it's written in a way where like
Coldness
you
is the right
feel,
word.
yeah, you feel how horrible his upbringing might have been.
Yeah. And, we said how seeing Sully kind of reflected back to him his own, vileness. Similarly, when he goes back to his mother and his sister when his father has just died, he's seeing that coldness, like you said, reflected back to him. But before, it never bothered him because he had no care in the world. He was that coldness. But now he's, and sorry to be corny about it, but he's felt Rachel's warmth. And he's seeing them, and he's seeing how empty and selfish they are as people. He asks them something like, what do you, I'm mad that I don't remember exactly what he asks them, but something like, what do you do to be happy, or something like that.
Yeah.
Or what do you do for, it really bothers me, I don't remember the exact like wording
For
of it,
leisure,
but
I think it was something like that he was asking them like what do they do in their free time, basically.
to feel fulfilled or something like that.
Yes, to feel fulfilled. That was it.
And neither of them has an answer. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, his mom is just like, oh, well, I'm just writing my letters to my lovers, but like, whatever, it's like empty as hell. Like, it's cold. Like, it's not love isn't like love. And then his sister looks at him like he's insane. And she's like, what happened to you? And he's like, you guys have no idea that there's more to life.
I know.
Life has sucked it out of you. Like, you are empty, and you feel no fulfillment of any sort in your life, and you're unhappy as a result, and I don't want that.
And I love that he recognized that.
Yeah.
And I think it's also, maybe we should also mention, before he went to see his dad dying, he kind of had a fight with Rachel. And the fight was more so, that's when she realized that the letter she received that she no longer had to visit the sheriff and the constable was a farce. Fake. And it was fake. And so she's kind of being arrested again because she wasn't fulfilling her parole requirements. And so the pastor is like, why don't you just marry Rachel? It would save her a lot of issues here. And he kind of laughs that off in her face. And he's not really like thinking about how her feelings could be affected by that. They had a fight, and she's like, I'm going to leave you. I'm not staying here. And so he goes, and then he comes back to her being gone. But during that time, he recognizes that he wants her in his life as his wife. And he wants that warmth every day. He wants her to be there every day. How did you feel about the conclusion to their relationship? Well, that we see on page. How did you feel about the way they ended for us?
Well, I mean, first off, the fact that he laughs it off, I like as a moment, because the work isn't done. The work isn't over. He still has moments where you think, were you thinking about that other person's feelings, or are you just thinking about yourself?
Of yourself, yeah.
So I like that scene. Now, for the conclusion, I like how it ended. I felt like it was a very well-rounded story, and by the end, again, the book doesn't end as if, okay, well, it's over and they're happily ever after now, and he's a perfect gentleman and will forever be.
Yeah.
But they end in a place where I think they have reached an understanding of each other that's deeper than anyone else has ever understood either of them.
Yeah, and I love during her trial when he's like, we're getting married, it's happening, like, we're getting married soon, that's why she was, like, seen somewhere else. but we're getting married. And Rachel's like, no, we're not.
No.
I'm not marrying you. Don't lie for me. I'm not lying for you. We're not getting married.
Yeah.
And I love that that scene happened, because for
Yeah.
Rachel, she's like, it's not happening because he laughed it off. And he's like, it is happening because I want it to. And I liked they had their quiet moment in the end where he's like, I actually do want to marry you and I want to make you my wife. And I just loved that moment. I just felt like, honestly, where they were at the beginning of the book is nowhere close to where they ended up at the end of the story. And it's
Yeah.
just the beginning for them. There's so much more for them to like go through and experience as a couple, that I like that it ended at a point where it's like, okay, this is where we're at now, but you know, we still have a bright future ahead. I like that.
Yeah, and the importance of the contrast between her two marriages. You know, she entered the first marriage, it was all deceit, manipulation, etc. And here they start their engagement or enter their marriage debating with each other. You know,
Yes.
they're kind of seeing what's your limit, what's my limit, where are you coming from, where I'm coming from, do we understand each other?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not entering this marriage with you until, you know, we are on the same page on this and this and that. And I think that that's like very important, you know, because Rachel has fully regained control over her life. So she's entering this wedding now, this marriage now, on honest, like, you know, it's honest, it's open, it's not what the first one was.
Exactly. And I feel like here it's more transparent, I would say. And
exactly.
it's more
That's
so
what I was
like,
looking for.
yeah, and it's more so they know each other down to the marrow of their bone. They know each other. And that, like you said, it's just not at all like what our first marriage was like.
Did you have anything else on your list?
No, just to say that I really enjoyed reading the story, and I actually really enjoyed talking about it as well. I was kind of worried that we would get canceled. I hope we're not canceled, but I do think it was a good discussion, and
I hope we discussed it in a nuanced manner that, you know, shows that we obviously do not agree with the hero's actions in the beginning. But it is a book at the end of the day. And I can respect a book that wants to put change as, you know, the driving force behind it, you know, that wants to show change as a powerful tool.
Yeah, I agree with that.
For people.
And like, I honestly, sincerely hope us saying that we believe in his growth as a character does, like, we are not condoning his actions.
No.
We just
and neither is he. You know?
Yeah, and neither is Rachel, neither is the author Patricia. No one is condoning his actions and like kind of letting it slide by, but I do think I believed in his growth as a character. I believed in it, and I commend the way the author handled it.
So, I hope that if you've made it this far, you enjoyed our discussion.
Yes.
If you have anything you would like to add, that you would like to comment on something that we've said, you can find us online. On Instagram, we are Romance in the Monsters Podcast. On Twitter, it's the RTM Pod. On Gmail, it's romanceinthemonsterspodcast@gmail.com. TikTok is Romance in the Monsters Pod, and obviously we are also on YouTube. If you prefer that format, you can just search the name of our podcast and you should be able to find us. Feel free to leave us a little subscribe while you're there. And if you're looking for me specifically, I am on both Twitter and Instagram at Foes and Lovers.
Okay, and I, Seth, you can find me on both Instagram and Twitter at Pros with Woes.
And that's it. We'll see you next week, guys. Bye.
Bye.